You can't tell the story of justice in Richmond in the last 30 years without talking about David Hicks. In 1994, he became one of the youngest Commonwealth's attorneys in the city's history, at a time when Richmond was considered the murder capital of the South. Hicks would hold that job for more than a decade and later serve as one of the closest advisors to Mayor Dwight Jones. Then, in 2015, he'd return to the courtroom, but this time he'd be wearing a robe. Today, all rise for the life story of a judge who's seen it all. Welcome back to Untold. Joining me today, Judge David Hicks, longtime friend of mine, I will say out loud. I don't know if we're supposed to be friends or not, David, but you were a good contact, a good source. You always told me what was on the record, not on the record. Kept me straight when I was trying to get information out of City Hall. But I don't have to do that anymore. You came here willingly without any... I didn't have to drag you. Isn't that nice?
It does feel different.
And now, I mean, back then, you were not Your Honor. Now, you've got the big title. Does that ever get old? I mean, do you get used to it?
Now, I've been on the bench now since January 1 of 2015, so I'm just getting close to 10 years. And it's kind of interesting, though. So, for judges, your official title is the Honorable, fill your name in.
Right.
But kind of interestingly, I was elected as Commonwealth Attorney back in 93. So,
right.
I was 32. So interesting, well, I guess 33 when I got elected. So interestingly enough, on the first day of January of 1994, my title was the Honorable.
You were
David
honorable
Hicks.
back
so
then.
I don't know when I left office, if I stopped being honorable.
But now people have to say it. But now,
so
it's got to be
no
a
one
thing.
stood up for you when you came in the room as Commonwealth Attorney.
Yeah.
They would stand up in a room, so that makes it a little bit different. But it's a good thing. I'm enjoying it.
It's an interesting topic to think about. How often judges are making news these days. I don't want to get political. We stay away from political terms as much as possible on this podcast. But, I don't remember prior to very recently that judges would be so central in headlines and in decisions and in conversations. But there really is a lot that goes into the decisions you make. It's not necessarily like, okay, the law says this, so I have to do that. I mean, you're all different, really.
Absolutely.
And you apply the law and see the law in a lot of different lenses. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely see that in the decisions that range across the country.
On the biggest screen is the Supreme Court of the United States. Okay, the 9 members of the Supreme Court of the United States, 9 justices. And kind of the saying goes, you get told in law school, is that if everyone who happened to be a good lawyer and experienced, et cetera, if everyone saw the law the exact same way, you wouldn't need 9 of them. The simple fact is you've got 9 because you can have 9 people look at the exact same issue and look at the exact same law and look at the exact same history and have different points of view.
So what is it in your reasoning or in your mind that you rely on the most? I mean, obviously, you've got to look at the law. You've got to look at the precedent. You've got to look at the person's history. You've got to take that whole cumulative picture into account.
Absolutely.
But what do you tap into for your decisions? Is it heart? Is it a gut thing? Is it are you relying on experience from being in the courtroom? I mean, what is it that helps you form that lens?
Probably a little bit of all of the above. The number one thing in my personal philosophy is the number one things that you have to represent to the public is you have to represent, you have to emit trust and competence and competence even. The system, our system of government, and we live in the exceptions, interesting enough when you think about it. For the most part, we are a country of laws, and for the most part, those laws are voluntarily complied with. Mm-hmm. Most individuals, if you're on a dark country road at 2 a.m. and you come to a T intersection, you still stop at the stop sign. Mm-hmm. It's not because anyone's around. We usually do comply with the law. Now, what I see every day, and every other judge sees, is the occasions where people are accused of being the exception to what normally is the rule. Mm. Now, when you can see it all day long, you can start thinking this is what the whole picture looks like, but it really isn't. But since we do have a system of, a nation of laws and voluntary compliance, the number one thing you have to have in the system for courts is trust. The people have to be able to trust that they may not agree with your decision, but they have got to trust that you are at least trying to do it the right way. You have to have a system where people can believe in that. So the number one things that I try to do is act in a fashion that the individuals who come before me can know that they are respected and heard. There's a system that says the more trust exists, the less force that's needed. And since our whole system of government is a voluntary compliance, it is based upon that trust. So for the courts, the place where most individuals that happen to come into, that's going to be their only impression. That's one of the reasons I love General District Court. It's the broadest gate. Most of the 8 million Virginians will go through their entire lives and never see the inside of a courtroom. Of the small percentage that do see the inside of a courtroom, they're probably going to see a General District Court. Most often, it's going to be even traffic court. And so we are, in General District Court, the front door of the court system.
What do you think your impression among lawyers and defendants, if they were to say, and you know this because you were a defense attorney and you were a prosecutor, and there were certain judges you wanted to get for certain cases, and you said, I hope we don't get that guy because he's not going to give my guy bond, or I hope we get this guy because he's going to really throw the book. I mean, you knew who drew sharper lines on what things.
Absolutely.
So if looking at yourself from that perspective, trying to put yourself in the CA who's trying his case in your court, what do they say about Judge Hicks?
Not sure exactly what
they
say.
Do you lean one way or the other? Do they think you lean one way or the other?
And it probably depends on the prosecutor. Here's the other funny thing about General District Court. Golly, I was an assistant prosecutor after I had practiced law for almost 4 years. I became an assistant prosecutor in 1990 for the first time. My average day in court, I am sitting there with a prosecutor that's probably under 30, with a defense attorney who's probably under 30, and on one of those moments when my mind wanders and I have to think about something else, I'm doing math in my head, and I'm realizing that I'm older than both of them put together, and I still got something left. So on those days, what it is that you're trying to impart and whether or not they think you're tough on certain things, and they learn. Everybody's got to tell. It's just like anything else. They, in my particular court, if they know one thing, for example, it's if I think public safety can be met and I think an individual is going to come on back to court, the presumption of keeping someone, the presumption in Virginia is predominantly a presumption for bail.
Right.
So unless, they're going to be dangerous or they're not going to come back to court, the realities of being held pre-trial are very real.
Right.
I mean, one of the things I hope people know is I probably have got more than my share of real life experience from having grown up and different environments I've had the occasion to be in. I grew up in I was born in 1960. I grew up.
Well, let's get into it. Rough neighborhood in Jersey.
Yeah.
And you learned some street smarts there that have educated you, and then had a tragedy happen in your life.
Absolutely.
So tell us about that.
I don't know about street
We're going to get back to what you're known as in a minute. So fair on bond would be one. Fair on bond.
But on the flip side of fair on bond, it's like I probably am harder than many on what I consider predatory behavior. I mean, my best mentor, was a gentleman by the name of Murray Janis, and he was just a fantastic lawyer, and I just learned so much from him. And one of the things that Murray, I was in my early 30s. Murray was 55 years old at that time, which seemed old, but you live long enough, you learn better. And Murray always had the opinion of, look, just an incredible defense attorney, just beyond incredible. He said there really should be two different types of jails. Should be the jail for the really bad, dangerous people, and there should be the jail for the people who do stupid things. And if that were the case, trust me, the jail for people who do stupid things would be about 10 times as big as the jail for dangerous people. So part of what hopefully your worldview brings into perspective is you being able to distinguish between this is a situation where there's an individual who really is predatory and dangerous. versus this is a person that did something stupid versus there, but by the grace of God go I. And depending on your own individual walk, those are all going to be there. And that's why every judge has a different point of view on it.
Do you think you have developed a sharper sense of seeing those differences from the bench? I mean, you've had a lot of court experience. You've met with a lot of defendants. You've met with a lot of people. Do you feel like your vision now of saying, okay, this person's truly evil or truly got a problem, this person's, not made a great decision, and this person actually may just not deserve to be here? Like, do you think making those distinctions has come sharper with age and experience, or just
hopefully?
Yeah.
I think it was Muhammad Ali that said that if a person sees the world the same way at 40 as they did at 20, they just wasted 20 years of their life.
Yes, I agree with
So
that.
if I'm not seeing it, I don't know what quarter I'm in, but I'm definitely in the second half of the game.
Yeah.
So if I'm not seeing it a little better now than I did when I was 30, I'd be worried a little bit.
Yeah.
But, we're all fallible. So,
Right.
We all sometimes don't see things that we wish we had.
And your life experience, we're going to go back to that just to sort of talk about how that has informed that acute sense. Talk to us about where you grew up, your home situation, and obviously the pivotal thing that sort of changed everything.
Born in 1960, a city called Plainfield, New Jersey, in Union County. My parents were both from Georgia. They were sharecroppers' kids, moved up north in the diaspora. My mom and dad were like both the first ones from their family to move up north, so different family members as they came up would live with us, et cetera. So it's always some different cousin or something in the house. Anyway, bought their house with my uncle. It was a duplex. My mom and dad were upstairs. My uncle was downstairs. Working class neighborhood, mixed working class neighborhood, interestingly enough. And you could Google Plainfield, New Jersey race riots in the 60s and the riots, that hit, it was at L.A. and Newark and Detroit, also hit Plainfield very hard. I mean, there's an article that came out in Union County magazine not long ago that celebrated the 50th, I believe, anniversary of the riots. And they decimated our neighborhood. I mean, they literally, my friend Glenn, who lived downstairs at the time, and I sat on the front stoop and watched the tanks come in the street.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you can look on any article, and there's West 3rd Street, and there's pictures of the tanks, and some armory had gotten broken into, and the National Guard was out, and they literally were looking for, I forget the number, 30, 40 carbine rifles that had gotten stolen from the Army. So they were doing house-to-house searches.
Wow.
Going up in attics and everything else.
Wow.
And at one point in time, we were in the backyard playing, some kids from the neighborhood, and literally this National Guard that surrounded the backyard, and you were there. So that experience, though, at night, the gunshots would be going off. My mom put us in a bathtub, because gunshots, and literally there was the corner store, that Joe's Market, that was there. And then the next morning, it was burnt out.
Wow.
So the neighborhood never recovered from that. So the neighborhood from the 60s, like I said, my sisters are 12 and 7 years older than me. They literally grew up in a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood, and I came up in the ghetto, which is a term we don't even use anymore. But that was that. So that was interesting. And the neighborhood really never recovered from that. Like I said, both working-class parents. My mom was a maid. My dad was a construction worker. And
Tell me about your dad.
yeah, in 74, on the 15th of December, 2 days after my dad's 55th birthday, my dad went, and he was like the person in the construction crew that brought the truck home. So he would have to go and pick up the crew and go to the work site. But you couldn't park the truck on the street because I guess it was an open truck, can't park in the street. So block up, there was this lady that had a big, yard. It wasn't a big yard, it was a converted store. I guess it was probably a parking lot behind it, not that large. And that's where my father would park his truck. Now my dad, hardworking guy, great guy, hardworking guy, but my dad had a drinking problem coming up. So on this particular Sunday, my dad leaves to go park the truck, 5-ish in the afternoon. And instead of coming home directly, he stopped at the corner bar. And so some of this is still fuzzy. My brother-in-law, I will never forget, my older sister's husband, about 5:45, comes in and he tells me, he's like, your father's been shot. And then 10 minutes later or so, I remember him saying, he's dead. And all I can remember was him saying, we're talking about many, many years ago now. And he was like, can you handle it? Can you handle it? And interestingly enough, this was 6-ish on Sunday, the 15th of December of 74. The next thing I remember was late January when I went back to school for the first time.
Wow. You just went into a
I
shutdown.
remember wasn't able to make it to my father's funeral. I remember, for some reason, don't ask me why, I had bunk beds and I slept on the top bunk. And on the day of the funeral, they told me there, and I can remember every single person who came into my room to try to wake me up. I remember my friend Harry. I remember my mom. I remember my brother-in-law. I remember my uncle. I can remember every single person's, like I could see them clearly, I could tell you what they were, that tried to wake me up.
Do you think you were in shock?
Oh, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and
just
back
sort
in
of
those
shut down
days,
and,
oh gosh,
torn up.
just shock, probably trauma, all those, things, and
Do you remember anything that was going through your mind while you were in that sort of
probably
state?
Probably if you had told me, I don't know, when I was 25, that by the time you're 35, that gap in time is going to get filled in. And I was like, yep, that sounds about right. But since I'm almost 65 and that gap still hasn't gotten filled in,
it's probably staying vacant.
It's not going. I don't think it's going to get filled in anytime.
Yeah.
So so that was that. So then that was just me and my mom. So it was just me and my mom, and it had an effect on her as well. And needless to say, it had a crazy financial effect on us. I mean, so and probably because of that, my mother and then my sister Deb came back home. Probably the three of us always, then from that point on, just became beyond super close. Mm-hmm. I mean, I promise you could tear a page out of a psych book and probably read my profile on it. Just then I'm exceedingly, protective of my mom. And before she had my mom and my sisters, it was just us against the world.
Ruby.
That was,
Yeah.
And that was the survival.
She watched you in court
She
finally
did.
one time, didn't she? She watched you try a case.
She got to watch me try one of my last cases. And Mom is an incredibly special person. I mean, I probably, the greatest blessing that I ever had in this world, which clearly I didn't do anything to deserve it, was the woman that brought me into it. I mean, my mom was just a beyond incredible person. I mean, just as giving as the day is long, but just beyond tough.
How do you think that decision, having your father murdered at that age, which to fill in for the audience, it was an argument that happened in the bar.
Dad was in the bar arguing over a football bet.
And the guy pulled out a gun and
a friend of his kills him.
Right.
I mean,
and that guy was
foolishness.
Convicted.
To the best of my knowledge.
Yes. But you never really followed up on that, which I find very interesting. Because, I mean, you're a prosecutor, you're a lawyer, you're a judge. And, like, the curiosity in me wants to go, like, trudge in there and find out where that guy is. But I'm surprised that you've never felt like you want to open that box. Just kind of leave it.
I have literally never had even the unction to look back. I mean, and you've had friends ask, time of years, whatever happened. I truly have no idea.
Yeah.
So.
And you don't want to. You're kind of good with it.
I mean, if I found out, I wouldn't like turn and run the other way from it. But I've got no compunction to try to look.
To go find. Yeah. So back to the question. Sorry, I interrupted myself, I think. So having that trauma happen, witnessing crime as you did, having this mom that had this like tough but accountable but loving sort of balance of things. I mean, all of that has to be fused into whatever the rubrics is, whatever the process is in your brain that makes you determine these decisions that you make every day, which really affect people's whole lives moving forward. I mean, do you ever think how those lines connect?
My number one lens that I try to look through is, to sum it up in a sentence, there are no thems. The path that usually leads to some of our greatest atrocities start with the concept of thems. Mm-hmm. There are no thems. I view my courtroom as a gathering of the village. I view myself as the designated elder of the gathering, and there are no thems. Everything that is brought has been either an affront that one says happened to another, or a violation, an alleged violation of the rules of the village. But everyone in it is still a member of the village from the minute they walk into the door. The fact that there is an accounting under the rules, they're their rules. They're the village's rules. There are no thems. Mm-hmm. This is not something that we're doing to others. It's what we do to ourselves. And when we deviate from that, I think that's when the things occur that cause people to question. It's not, and everything, if you run through that sort of lexicon, if it's like once you go down to those people doing those things, you're doing thems. There is the law. We're all under the law. Sometimes when I'm sort of, counseling some of the younger lawyers, I have and it's changed over time depending on the celebrity, but you plug in the celebrity of choice's name and say, and if this were blank, would the same thing happen? If this were, and the current one is, because it's probably the most famous person that pops into my head, Taylor Swift. Mm-hmm. And at each place, if the defendant were Taylor Swift, would the result still be the same as it's about to happen today? If the witness was Taylor Swift, would you have talked to the witness more times than obviously you just talked to the witness for the first time before you put them on the stand in front of me? Mm. If everyone was a person who would get A-class treatment, and if we're not doing that, doesn't mean you're wrong, but it means we have to ask the next question. Tell me why. Mm. Tell me why you think it was okay to put this witness on the stand that you clearly hadn't talked to. You wouldn't have done that. Tell me why you think it was okay to have this level of a prosecutor prosecute this case with this particular victim, because if it had been Taylor Swift, you clearly wouldn't have. But that's just our test, because when you're doing things and you get caught up in it, you can get caught up in it. And there's not a whole bunch of people when you're on the bench that can say, or you can hear necessarily sometime, why'd you do it that way? Mm-hmm. So you have to self-regulate.
Well, you set me up because in the next segment, we're going to talk about you sending lawyers and police officers back to school. I think that's a good punctuation for this segment. We'll be right back. All right. All right, we are back with Untold and the Honorable Judge David Hicks. See that? I used your correct title that time, since we're getting so formal, friend.
Oh, gosh.
Anyway, I ended the last segment talking about you sending lawyers and police officers at times sort of a little hot note saying, review the Constitution or check your case before you bring it in here. You've been known to do that on occasion. You've caused a little stir here and there. And I'm going to pick two to kind of narrow our discussion. But the first one has to do with the Fourth Amendment. There were some gun cases that came before you recently. Mm-hmm. And I think, as I recall, the prosecutor from the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office sort of admitted at the jump that there were some constitutional issues, and you seized on that. Tell me. Well, Fourth Amendment, by the way, search and seizure,
Fourth
right?
Amendment,
Legal search and seizure.
Obviously, because of judicial ethics, I've got to, steer clear of certain matters if they happen to be currently in a court or something such as that.
Yeah.
But to back up a little bit, it really always gets to, and we always start with the fundamentals. It's sort of 8th grade civics. We have 3 branches of government. We have the legislative branch that makes laws. We have the executive branch that enforces the laws. And we have the judicial branch that interprets it. The legislature is the General Assembly in Virginia. The executive branch, that's, police, prosecutors, all those, and this is the judicial branch. So we are supposed to be separate. We're supposed to be separate. We're supposed to be independent. the long history of American jurisprudence that dates back to when Thomas Jefferson was the president, has the concept of what's called judicial review.
Right.
So it is the responsibility of the judiciary to call the balls and the strikes.
Right.
That's what we're there for.
So the idea that you're rooting for the prosecutor or that you're on their team is a falsehood.
Well, it shouldn't be. For anybody, it shouldn't be. The only team that you're supposed to be on as a judge is the team for the Constitution of the United States of America, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia for a Virginia judge, and the rule of law. Mm-hmm. That's the team. Right. So that's the team, and everything that everyone else, we do under color of law. We have the authority to do what it is that we do because the flag that sits behind me on the bench every day and is on every police officer's uniform and hangs behind the common attorney's desk, unless it's changed since the time I've been there, it's all the same flag. Mm-hmm. And we're all supposed to be under that same rule of law, and there aren't supposed to be separate interpretations of that law based upon what end of town you're from or where you happen to be born or how you happen to practice your religion. That is the thing that makes America unique. Mm. Now, that uniqueness isn't always easy. So sometimes when we see the bubbling up of it, it's because if it was easy, we probably wouldn't have survived.
You'd be out of a job.
Well, not that, but because you got to figure that also. Plus, I just read somewhere recently, and it's really scary because I am getting old. I remember the bicentennial in 1976, up in New York, whatever. We're about to get to the 250th anniversary of our nation. Mm. And the fundamentals of the rule of law that have brought us through all those changes, some of them are hard to look at, but it's been the rule of law that's brought us through. It's been the rule of law why, I'm no longer property. It's been the rule of law why you can vote. It's the rule of law. Those changes in our society, they don't always have to be smooth. But we've always progressed towards becoming that more perfect union. Mm. And all the different systems of government have to work in it. So if, in fact, the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, which says that you shall be safe in your person and the property from unreasonable searches or seizures, that is what the founders put in place not long after a revolution from England to say this is where we want to make sure the government doesn't do to the citizens. Mm-hmm. That we are a nation with the consent of the governed, that government comes from the citizenry, not the other way around, and that balance always has to be maintained. So if the courts, what our job sometimes is, in the criminal context especially, is deciding.
Right.
Was it reasonable? Was it reasonable? Did you step over the line? Did you have a warrant?
Right.
Did you have those things? And
you maybe had a gun, but what brought you to think that?
The bottom line is
search.
And it's the hardest thing sometimes, but the bottom line is you don't get to start with the end and back up. If you find something, and probably because I came up, as a prosecutor especially, in the 90s where, we were talking about 100 and plus murders every year and those type of cases. And the quality of lawyers we had in the 90s was just off the chain. That literally, whether or not you quote unquote caught the bad guy, that's not the story. Whether or not you can build a prosecutable case in a court of law and convince 12 citizens, that's the end goal. Because if you could not, then the bottom line is just in the
bad guy.
Doesn't matter because there's no such thing as catch the bad guy. It's whether or not you can convict somebody. Because if you really want it to be a deterrent effect, then the deterrence has to be if you commit a crime, the likelihood is you're going to get caught. If you get caught, the likelihood is plain fair that you're going to get convicted. Then you have to then do the math. Maybe I shouldn't do the crime in the first place. If you break any one of those chains, then it's there. So interesting enough, one of the things that we had to do back in the 90s when it was, different, was you had to think, okay, fine, if I'm thinking I'm just searching for, guns, okay, whatever. But the bottom line is if that search turned out to be an improper search, then that would have been an improper search whether or not it was a gun or whether it was the bloody knife from a homicide. And under Virginia law, an improper search, the fruits of that search, significantly can get excluded. So if you're talking about you did a search and it wasn't a proper search, okay, well, maybe today it was just, a gun and we'll get another one tomorrow. But no.
What if that was valuable
What
evidence?
if that was the bloody one and all evidence? But
right.
What if that was truly
the smoking gun?
The smoking gun, the bloody knife for the serial killer?
Right.
The rules are going to be the same. So it's almost like in sports. You got to practice during the week like you're going to play on Sunday.
Right.
And there is only one discipline. In every case, which I say too often in court, every case in our system of government, I don't care if it's a trespass or it's capital murder, it starts the exact same way. It starts with the defendant being presumed to be innocent. And that presumption of innocence remains with that defendant unless and until the evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt that they're in fact guilty. So every case, you don't turn it up.
Right.
Every case, the fundamentals are the same. Every case, you've got to make sure that you check the T's, dot the I's. That doesn't mean there are some cases that you're going to have a little bit of extra scrutiny on because they're higher profile.
Right.
So you're going
Thanks
to really
for setting me up again, because we're going to talk about a high-profile case now where you sort of also, you took an unprecedented action that I think was the first time you might have done it as a judge. Had you revoked a bond before the time that I'm talking about? You know which case
time we're talking about?
July 2022.
Oh.
We're talking about the
remember.
The two illegal immigrants that were essentially named on national television by our city leaders as having plotted a mass shooting at the Dogwood Dell July 4th fireworks celebration. And our city leaders went on national television on July 6th and boasted that they had stopped this horrible mass shooting from occurring because of a hero citizen that had called in this tip. And so they flash up the two pictures of these two Guatemalan illegal immigrants who were here in this country and say, they are now in custody. See something, say something, so on and so forth. This particular press conference happened hours after you had given these two gentlemen bond. And I remember in an article you saying, I was at home, I was watching TV, every TV station in town was covering the thwarted mass shooting, and I was thinking to myself, what did I miss? I was in court this morning when these two appeared before me, but there was no evidence no one mentioned Dogwood Dell.
Remembered now, yes.
And no one mentioned any evidence of
correct. I remember.
A sort of a terrorist plot afoot.
Yes,
right.
I do remember.
So you did revoke their bond because you thought maybe I did, maybe something went wrong.
Maybe something. What
eluded
occurred
me.
on that day it was a regular bond hearing. I don't remember all the specifics, but you just got my memory. And I think the charge was possession of firearm by an individual that wasn't legally in the country, whatever.
Right.
And and it was relatively regular.
It was fairly routine.
It was a relatively routine charge. And then, as you said, I remember getting home, and then all of a sudden it was like, what? That was the same case? So it was like, okay, whatever's going on. And sometimes
the case had developed.
The prosecutor that's in the court in a particular morning, we do arraignments at 8:30 in the morning, depending on when a person gets picked up. Sometimes the morning prosecutor doesn't have all the details, et cetera, et cetera. So it can happen that they don't know all the details. For the most part, a prosecutor, if they want an individual held, is going to make sure that the judge knows all the reasons that they want him held.
Right.
So in this case, I don't remember all the details, but I know none of that was presented.
Right.
So that when it came up, it's like, whoa, okay. So we addressed the bond particular issue on that.
Had you ever done that before?
I've revoked bonds before. Sometimes an individual out on bond will then do something. They maybe
Right.
commit another crime, or then something else will come up. But generally, I cannot recall another instance where it was because I acted on one set of information and then found out that there was more information that I hadn't had. I cannot recall ever doing that before. So, but yes, that happened with that particular piece of it.
Okay, so then take us into the courtroom the next morning because
Was it the next morning?
I
Okay.
think it was
I
the
don't
next
remember
morning.
what it was.
It was very soon after in time. The prosecutor comes back.
There were a couple things, and again, golly, here's, and this was right around after COVID time, so all my memories are a little bit jumbled from that time. What I recall is there was the bond, and then there was an issue. Right, because the Dogwood Dell came up, and then there was an
Conflict
issue.
of interest, right?
I remember.
Yeah,
that.
because your sons were there.
Right, thank you very much. Because by this time it was really clear that I hate to do too much Wizard of Oz analogy, but we weren't in Kansas. So something was going on. Like, hey, this isn't Kansas. I've been doing this way too long that you have a general sense of when things feel a certain way. As I said before, my first year as Commonwealth attorney, we had 160 homicides in the city of Richmond.
Hey.
We had 3% of the state's population. We had 28% of the state's homicides. I have seen, for the most part, most of the things that people can do to each other and the sense of Richmond type things.
Right. This didn't seem like
I'm
that.
not going to pretend that there wasn't there wasn't a disturbance in the force, if you will, that, okay, something's not feeling quite all there, especially given the initial, whoa, no one even said that this was about, okay? So, as I probably mentioned before, you always go back to fundamentals. So no matter how tougher the game is, as a matter of fact, the more you go back to fundamentals. So fundamentals are, okay, if this is something different, every T has got to be crossed, every I's got to be dotted. And fundamental number one is the system has to have the appearance of fairness.
Right. And this suddenly became a much more high-profile situation.
Yeah.
You thought at the time you were giving bond that this was a routine gun charge, that this was, there was no real case to be made even to hold them, and then you find out in the evening news that the country has just learned that Richmond had potentially a terrorist attack.
Absolutely.
And this was on the heels of a very deadly and sad situation in a suburb of Chicago, of Highland Park.
It was right after that. I remember
And there had been a similar situation where there really had been a terrorist act and it had taken some lives. And so people were on edge.
Of course.
So now you're the judge that just bonded out two guys who were going to...
hadn't quite gotten out yet, but had granted bond, but they vote before they got out.
Right.
And then what happened was, so at this point in time, then the prosecutors coming in, and I do not remember, I think whatever was about to happen, and I had to back it up a step, because I think whatever was about to happen was going to be some motion, because I think the intent was for the case to be sent from state courts to federal courts. And I don't remember any of that, but I remember at this point in time, I was like, whoa, time out. If something is this level of profile, which means there's going to be that level of scrutiny that's going to come with something like that. We have to make sure all the I's are dotted, I's are dotted and T's crossed. And numbered one, candidly, is always for a judge, is there a reason that I should not be on the case? Now, I'm not going to pretend that every judge has the exact same view of what it means to stay on a case, or the legal term when you take yourself off is recuse yourself from the case. Some judges, I probably got a little bit more of a tolerance, for conflict than some. So I very often don't see the need to take myself off a case where maybe some others would. People are different.
But in this case, you were questioning it because your sons were at this fireworks celebration. At the very event in question that was supposedly the target, you had two sons there that
night. Sons there. And this was in 2022. Okay, so it would have been my youngest son, with special needs, and my middle son. And Chris always would take John to these events. He would put the headphones on him, and I was like, whoa, time out. This is literally, and you know me low enough, I'm probably a doting dad is probably a fair enough statement. But there is no way that I could even have pretended to be impartial in a situation where literally my children could have possibly been at risk. So the issue of whether or not, and by this time I'm sure there have been things that called into question as a reporter, and that's something similar to trial lawyers and reporters have. You have to check your facts before they become facts.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so the question that I had to put to the prosecutor was, look, before I hear word number one on this, I need to know whether or not I can even be on this case.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked the question. And, I can't remember the prosecutor's name, but is there any evidence whatsoever that these individuals were in fact involved in a potential plot? And
a dog would do.
And I had to be very specific because I didn't want,
Because you were looking at the file.
I'm there, and he said what he said. He said no.
You asked again.
Yeah. And I was
you
like,
said
okay,
there's
then
no
in that
evidence.
Case, none. I want to be sure we were clear, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to discharge my ethical duties properly, and then that's on me. And if something, God forbid, let's pretend it was a terrorist attack. Let's pretend these individuals got the maximum punishment under the law. And there's always appeals in Virginia. Because then they come to find out that the original judge should never have been on the case. Right. And, you have to establish this beforehand. Now, in total candor, does that two things can be true at the same time? Does that mean that as long as I've been doing this and whatever spidey sense I have, did I not have some questions as to, wait a minute, this isn't 100% feeling right? Of course I did. But because I did that, I had to even more make sure that everything was airtight.
Were you shocked at the answer? Or were you expected that answer?
I wasn't shocked. I don't remember what it was.
I think the public was. I think the public was like, did he just say that, I'm sorry, 2 days ago we were on national television telling the country that these two were plotting terror in our community, and now the person prosecuting the case just admitted to irritated judge.
It was very calm. It was very calm.
I recall it being heated.
That's right.
But anyway,
heated. Jersey people can get heated.
Whatever adjective you prefer to use.
Okay, yes.
But anyway, you were definitely, you were not going to let that question escape the moment because you needed a clear answer.
That question was not going to escape
And I feel
the
like there was some like, well, we have well, and then finally it was like, no, I need to ask you, is there any evidence? And then the answer came out no, and then the charges in your court were null prost, and the case became an immigration issue, which turned over to the feds.
Absolutely.
But this whole idea of them being terrorists sort of went away. And I mean, I think for me as a journalist, unanswered questions and unaccountable whoever, I don't know if it's the police, if it's the, I mean, look at that press conference. You had the police, you had the mayor, you had city council. They were all standing up there. They all, told the same story. But if the stories of the fact the story still bothers me to this day. If the facts of this story were, premature, were untrue, or there was some other conspiracy behind it, to tell a community that this large of a threat was imminent, and then to find out in court openly that there was no evidence to prove that, still bothers me to this day. I don't feel like we've had a reconciling of that story. And you just happen to be, the guy at the center of it who kind of pulled the truth out of it, really. I mean, had you not done that, I'm not sure how things would have shifted along. But I do feel like there is some unanswered questions on that story that still remain.
Now, I limit my part of it to the
judicial
of the
part.
court
Yes, I gotcha.
piece. And in this particular instance, from my point of view, the part that did work. I had a young prosecutor in that court, Clint Seal, remember his name. Clint, young prosecutor, good, aggressive young prosecutor. You don't get to say former, you get to say Marine. Clint was a Marine, so he had served, he was a Marine, very dutiful person, so he was going to, there was no doubt in my mind that Clint was going to tell the truth. It was who he was, so whatever other things might have been going on, as far as any other marching orders or anything else, I believed that he was going to tell the truth. So for me, that part of this, my four corners of the system, the courtroom,
system worked. Yeah.
because I had a lawyer in front of me in a court of law, and he lived up to his ethical obligations as an attorney. Whether it was uncomfortable or something like that, he told the truth. He did what he was supposed to do. Whether there, and every lawyer has to get there to a point. And that's why the system works. It doesn't work sometimes. Because if, in fact, you won't tell the truth, our entire system of judgment, of justice is based upon this really scary notion, especially if you've seen too much of the world, is that people will come into a court and tell the truth. And to, on one hand, realize it's that fragile, but yet still works, is a little bit of the flip side. Now, some of those other components, I won't comment on it because they're outside my range, but I will say none of them were in court.
You're right. And in fact, this press conference that really kind of triggered your heightened sense of like, whoa, what I missed, that wasn't in court either. So there were some outside elements that put pressure on this, in the court sense. Had you not seen that press conference and saw it, like, you might have not.
Now, believe it or not,
second.
I didn't see the whole press conference.
I thought that's what triggered
No,
your...
I saw that's a glimpse of it. I mean, I didn't see the press conference.
But you saw that this case was a high profile.
Oh, yes.
It was being covered by every outlet in town. Now, and you can't really avoid that. I mean, when it's being covered at that level. And of course it would be. It's a massive story when someone is planning a terror attack on your 4th of July celebration. Like that's a pretty big headline to throw out there.
You jarred my memory with one of the other things I remember as far as that. There was some document that came across my desk before the hearing. I remember now. One of the individuals was like picked up or held in Charlottesville or Albemarle first. I just remembered that. And it was an oddest little document that came across my desk because what I found out before the hearing was that the individual had been picked up in Charlottesville or Albemarle and then transferred back to Richmond, and the other person was still at large. But what I recall now that you just mentioned was the individual that was picked up with the other individual that was still at large was held at the Richmond City Jail in general population.
I do remember that as well.
And I remember now it's like, whoa, wait a minute. I've done this for a minute. If you've got multiple individuals involved in something and they all have not been apprehended yet, especially if it's something ongoing, not to use too much TV terminology, you definitely put the ones you've caught on ice so they can't reach out and tell
communicate
anybody.
To another cell.
And I do remember that was probably if there was
something's not adding up here.
Yeah, the math isn't math.
Yeah, would you put and he was apprehended before the planned event.
Yes.
So knowing that you still had hours before this attack could occur.
Yeah.
He's sitting in general population where you can have phone calls, conversations, people can come and see you. Additionally, I would just add another piece of information. None of the police officers at Dogwood Dell were given any prior warning.
I remember that now.
So you knew that a potential mass shooting was to occur on their watch at this location, but none of the police were given this information. So they learned about it at the press conference, even though the information was known before the event. So, again, lots of questions
that you remember. I definitely remember some of that heat and wanting to know about whether my children were potentially at risk came from that of hearing that the police officers didn't know either.
So
I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah.
Quite a few questions to be determined. Hopefully we'll have more conversations on that if this issue might be plaguing you like it's been plaguing me. This is a good point to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay. We are back with the Honorable Judge David Hicks. And David, just before you arrived for this taping, I was telling Mike, I said, one of my favorite television shows of all time is The Wire. Like no one can really. I have not seen a television show. I mean, that was 2005, the last episode, and I have not seen one that has captivated and enthralled me. I don't watch things again, and I've watched that thing so many times. The reason I love it's because it's like the intersection of law, crime, poverty, drugs. I mean, it's like all of it. It goes, and you get to see it. They're judges. You get to see what judges think. You get to think what the prosecutor thinks, defense attorneys, slimy defense attorneys. I mean, all the whole gamut of like how all of it really works. Politics, politicians. And then I thought to myself, David, your life story is sort of like The Wire. The only thing you haven't done really is the cop part, but you certainly have worked with police a lot. I mean, you have been a prosecutor, you have been a politician, you have been a defense attorney, you have been a judge, you lived in an impoverished neighborhood, you knew crime, you knew drugs, you knew police. You kind of have a life story that is also all these intersections.
That's funny.
You know what I mean?
That's
it's like,
funny.
what of all of these roles, because you have, you've been elected as a politician, you've been prosecutor, defense attorney. I mean, you've been on all sides.
Interesting.
What has been the most challenging role so far?
Now, interesting enough, just for terminology, I was elected as Commonwealth attorney. Did three terms, 12 years.
Then you were in City Hall.
Yes, and that's an interesting point, because if you had asked me, after 3 terms of Commonwealth attorney in Richmond in the 90s, rough and tumble politics, I would have told myself, I would have said, okay, I'm a politician.
Yeah.
When I went to City Hall, because I did that, and then I was in private practice for 3.5 years, and then I went back to City Hall with Mayor Jones. So, Dwight brought me on board with him, and I learned a really interesting thing. Like John Marshall Courts building is, you could throw a rock and hit City Hall back and forth. I realized that I had been an elected official for 12 years. But I really didn't start understanding politics till I got to City Hall. Because all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I thought I knew politics. Oh, I really did know politics. City Hall's when I first started learning politics. And in hindsight, I recognized, but of course, because being an elected official, doing prosecution, all that's wonderful. It's important, especially in time. But it's not the money end of the family. City Hall is the money end of the family. And the money end of the family is then when the real politics starts. So that
because
was
of greed?
Well, just because whenever
Corruption.
money's on the table, there's going to
corruption.
be incentives to get more money. So whenever an incentive is there, you didn't have to follow the incentive to understand it. So it was really interesting. So I realized, like, oh gosh, I wasn't even close to a politician for those 12 years. I had just been elected.
Right.
Now this is like, whoa, this is a whole different world. So that was probably, at, golly, what was that when I went to City Hall, 47, 48? I really didn't think I still had that much education to get.
Yeah.
And I was surprised on a few different levels that that there is a difference.
Right.
And probably, the rounding out, one piece I would put back in there in that mix also, as far as the rounding out and being able to see things from different perspectives, is I went undergraduate in law school at the University of Virginia. Okay, so I got an undergraduate degree in economics. I went to law school. I went to UVA in the late 70s, and stayed until 86. And you want to talk culture shock, so here's a kid from the ghetto of Jersey,
Right.
and then he shows up in Charlottesville. I didn't know what a preppy was, before I got there. Then all of a sudden I'm seeing kids with alligators on their shirts and no socks on and, topsiders that I had never seen before. So, realizing that whole Southern gentleman thing in that life was a whole
Transition.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
totally different perspective.
Yeah.
Literally realizing, I had some exposure to affluent individuals, interestingly enough, because my mom was a maid. My mom worked for rich folks, and, I was a smart kid, so people always take a little bit of an interest in the smart kid and give them books and stuff like that. So I had a vision of the world that was outside what was outside my front door, when I would go to work with my mother.
Yeah.
So there was that piece of it. But I get to Charlottesville, and all of a sudden, you're the guy in the suite with you. At the end of the school year, his chauffeur comes and picks him up.
Wow.
And you're like, whoa, there's a lot of world out there.
Right.
Quick story. when you grew up poor and you got a little bit of chip on your shoulder because you think you're hard and everybody has some money, you think you're soft. And back in Charlottesville, I'll never forget the story. It was like, this is the early 80s. Magnum PI was on TV, and there was this kid. It was the first year because your first year you couldn't have your car. You only could have parked in a special lot.
Right.
And this kid had a black Ferrari, just like Magnums.
Wow.
With Florida plates on it. So in hindsight, I started worrying about that. But anyway, so I remember this one day, I'm walking down the street, and, I'm walking with a young lady. I don't remember who it was, but mind-blowing brilliance she had because the kid drives by in his Ferrari. And me with my, poor kid chip on my shoulder, I was like, what possible incentive can you have in life if you 18 years old and you already got a Ferrari? Without missing a beat, she said, keeping it. And my whole life perspective changed. I was like,
what a moment.
You're right.
Moment. Yeah.
If you do the right thing, if you study hard, if you whatever, someday you may get,
right.
That's incentive. But you bring me another grade like this and I'm taking your Ferrari keys. Like,
right.
Nah, fellas, I ain't going out tonight. I got to study. That's a whole different thing. But, probably, I'm a wanderer. I'm an explorer. That's probably always been part of me.
Will you wander back to politics?
No.
That chapter's closed.
Yes, most definitely. Now,
Really?
Doug Wilder, interestingly enough, was 71, I think, when he ran for mayor.
Yeah, I don't need to remind you the ages of our two most recent presidents. It's not impossible. It's not.
No. I love what I'm doing. I love the fact that I get to utilize all of the different things I've been able to do in my past, and I really do think what I do matters. I think I love General District Court because, like I said, it's the broad gate. Every single person that comes in there, you have an effect. You have an opportunity to have an effect on their life. If nothing else, the impression of what you've got. When you as real world as it gets for most people, when somebody comes to court and they've been doing 15 miles an hour over the speed limit because of inadvertence, and they come to court and they've got a good driving record and, they didn't mouth off at the cop, and you can let them go do driving school so they can get things dismissed so the insurance rates don't go up. You've had a huge effect on the world.
Right.
For that person, it's
Right.
like, oh, okay, so the insurance company won't get to jack my rates up for the next 5 years.
Right.
That matters.
Yeah.
So when you understand, because I've got family members, I have a complete unfair advantage for what it is that I do now, and candidly what I did when I was a prosecutor. I'm from a family that not only were we survivors of my father's tragedy, but this was an inner city family. I've got cousins who, Hickses and Johnsons, that's my mom's family, don't do sex crimes and have never done white collar. Everything in the middle, I got a cousin that's gone to jail for it. Somebody that I love and somebody's been to Thanksgiving table with us and, known them to be human beings other than this particular thing that they did. And that perspective of realizing the stress that the court system has, so you don't need to make it more stressful.
I think there's a quote from you, actually, that I read recently where you said, I relate more to a defendant than I have any lawyer I've ever hired or worked with.
Right.
And I mean, that's sort of what you're describing.
That was
right?
our secret sauce as the prosecutor's office that, we got to have this incredibly,
but
diverse
accountability
office.
is accountability is still part of it.
Because then you want, what's the higher calling? Right. What's your higher calling? If it's just lock up the bad guys, then you've already got a dichotomy in your head that there's good and there's bad, as opposed to shades of the gray.
Right.
And you've lost a piece of yourself in that too. Because, I don't know, I'm too much of a philosopher. I think it was Nietzsche that said that when battling against monsters, the first thing you have to do is not become a monster. And when you look into the abyss, you have to remember that the abyss looks into you. When you are doing the things that and facing some of the situations, your number one job is not to lose yourself. I mean, and that's, I have been beyond blessed. Oh my gosh, I've got people who used to work for me who are federal judges now. I've got people, the former ICE director, Tony Pham, worked for me, Rod Young, a federal judgment, Shannon Taylor, in Henrico. I probably have got, in the city of Richmond right now, of my current colleagues, 3 of them used to work for me. I mean, it's just been a blessing to have really good people that you get to be some
what a part of their
place
journey.
in their life and their journey,
right?
And them in mind, So I love the journey. I mean, every single person that comes in front of me in my court, I like to remember this is a person. Sometimes I joke with folks like, look, I'm going to respect your time because there's no doubt in my mind that you can think of someplace you'd much rather be than spending your day with me.
Right.
Nobody comes to my job to visit me because they want to. That's not the job I have right now.
I did. I visited you.
You did, but that was after hours. So, and
truthfully, I was talking about this podcast.
Be on the show, but it was okay. But it's such an important part of it, and you should enjoy your work. And if you what's the saying? If you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life. I mean, I have to believe in the law. I mean, I have to believe in the law because if I didn't believe in it, now does that mean that I'm naive and I think the system is perfect? Far from it. I know the atrocities that can happen under the system, but I also know that the system is run by people. And that individuals really trying to do something different can do it. It might not always be easy, but you can do it. You can make a little bit of a difference. You can try. Heck, when I was Commonwealth attorney, when we had 100 and daggone, my first year in office in 1994, we had 160 homicides. Okay, we were number 2 or 3 per capita in the United States.
Yeah.
We had more numerical homicides in 1994 than Newark, New Jersey.
Wow.
The concept of anything that could be done about that was it can't be done. Now, did we do it all by ourselves? No. But the one thing I do believe in is I totally believe in leadership. I think leadership always makes a difference. I mean, there's 32 teams in the NFL. Some of them every year are going to vie for the Super Bowl. Some of them you never hear from. They all got the same number of players. They all got the same amount of money. Leadership is the difference. I truly believe in leadership. When a community suffers, it's probably because of leadership. That's not a political statement. That's a factual statement. That leaders always make a difference. Leaders make a difference in families. Leaders make a difference in neighborhoods. Leaders make a difference in nations. For the court system, in that courtroom, that's the place where I'm supposed to be the leader. That's the place where the concept of I'm going to look you in the face, Judge, and not tell you the truth shouldn't cross your mind. That's the place where if we're treating each other with the proper respect, I truly believe in the criminal context that'll flow out into the street. If you know that judge is going to frown upon you, if you are calling people out of their name, then the likelihood that you want that judge to see a body cam with you doing that's probably going to affect. I want you to get home safe every night. Every single person in uniform, I want to make it home safe to their family every night. I also want to make sure that we all recognize that we're operating under the rule of law and that in our nation, citizens have rights and we have to respect them. And I truly believe from all the roles I've had and the one I have now, you can do both. You can follow the rules and you can make a difference. You can make the community safe and you can still have the rule of law. The Constitution has withstood a couple hundred years of a whole bunch of different circumstances, and we're still here. And I believe that no matter what comes before us, in the end of the day, the test is going to be whether or not the rule of law prevails. And the place where that's going to get tested are in our courtrooms. Little lowly general district courts like mine and up to the Supreme Court of the United States. That's where the rubber meets the road in Virginia. The 400 of my colleagues that serve the 8 million people, in the Commonwealth, that's what we're called upon to do.
I wouldn't associate the word lowly with you ever, to be honest, David. I think your thoughts and your perspectives are at the highest level, and I regard them in the highest esteem. And I'm so glad that we got to a minute to chat today.
Thank you.
It's just so rare that you get inside the head of a judge. You really never know what you guys are thinking up there. And you have a lot of thoughts. So thank you for coming. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And thank you guys for listening for another episode of Untold. We'll see you next time. Untold is a production of WTVR CBS 6, executive produced by Mike Bergazzi and Katie Beck, directed by Nick Maharaj and Brock Taylor, and edited by Curtis Akers. Follow the show on Instagram at Untold_WTVR.
I'm Rich Marr, host of the VPM podcast, RVA's Got Issues.
Power grid outages.
There was that water crisis that happened.
More housing?
At least you should get paid $15 an hour. At least.
Download it wherever you get your podcasts.